Hello and welcome to Bits Box World, builds made easy. Has this ever happened to you?
Let's get some paint and just put this on our palette.
I'm so moist.
Oh, paint's going a bit dry.
Is it me or is it getting a bit hot in here? Drying out a bit.
Just get a bit of water.
So thirsty! So thirsty!
Oh, it's going really dry.
Oh, it's like the Sahara Desert. It's like a desert. Oh no. I think that's it. I think that's me. I think that's me.
Why does this always happen? There's got to be an easier way to keep my paint wet.
Well, I'm glad you asked the question because there is an easy way to keep your paint wet, and that's using a wet palette. So I'm going to show you a really easy, cheap way, and also this way here that is a little bit more expensive. I've bought a box for this one. So you'll need to have a container that seals, and these really useful boxes, I really like them. They've got the clips on the side and they pull the lid tight on to make an airtight seal, but any container would do that seals with a sealable lid. Next, you're going to need something that's going to hold the water within your wet palette, and I've got one of these. This is sort of a sponge type cloth that you can buy. They come in packs of sort of 4 or 5, and you just want to make sure that it fits into your box. These ones here, they fit nicely into my really useful box just by folding them over and pressing them in. If you need to cut them, they're really easy to cut with a pair of scissors also, but you want to press it completely flat so there's no air bubbles between the layers. Whether you're cutting or folding, get rid of all the air pockets between the layers. And then you want to pour your water onto this. You want to make it nice and wet, but we're going to be dealing with any excess water in a minute. So squeeze it down, make sure the whole thing is wet, and then just pour away any excess water that you're getting in your wet palette, because we don't want it to be sopping wet. We don't want it to be a great flood. You can hold your container at an angle as well and squeeze from the top down to just find out if there's any more excess water and just pour that away. So once you've dealt with your excess water, you want to get your baking paper. So this is going to be the top of your palette. This can also be called parchment paper, and the type that you're looking for, you don't want it to be wax covered or silicone covered, and you want to make sure that it's not grease proof as well, because you want the moisture to soak into this paper. I'm going to leave a link in the description below of the parchment paper or baking paper that you could use from this. It's just easy from Amazon, relatively cheap, and you get them in these massively long rolls of paper. So that gives you the option to make many wet palettes if you like, and you'll be replacing the coverage of your wet palette anyway when you've used a lot of paint on it. So make sure that it fits in, cut it to size so it can sit nicely on top of your sort of wet platform underneath. And then you can just press this in and it will start to absorb and soak up some of the water from the level below. So it gets a bit damp, but it shouldn't tear, shouldn't rip, and it should just be nice and ready for you to start applying paint on. So the whole idea of this is that your palette level will be damp, will have a bit of wetness to it. So when you apply your paint to it, your paint will stay moist, will stay wet. Obviously, you need to be mindful that if you are using something like a tile or a general plastic palette, you sometimes add water to that to bring some life back into your paint, or to slightly water it down. Well, with this method, you might not need to water it down as much as you're used to. So you can just apply some paint to the palette. And then you can also do some mixing. So if you want to do some mixing, it gives you a really nice platform for you to do that. And you can pour your paint into the other colours that you're making a mix with. And it gives you a level of that mix, but also keeps that paint nice and moist, nice and wet, and it won't dry out ever so quickly like it does on a tile or on your normal plastic paint palette. You can also on this drop some little beads of water. So if you do need to increase the wetness of that, or you want to make a wash, you can put those beads of water on there and they will sit nicely, and then you can mix and make a wash. And that wash will sit there nicely on top of your parchment paper, ready for you to use. Now, the great thing about having a wet palette in one of these containers is you can put the lid on to retain the paint that you've been using. So it won't dry out. You'll be able to come back to this paint after a day or so. And there is a really basic way that you can make these wet palettes as well. If you don't have money to spend, you can use things that are lying around. So this is just an old container that had my Chinese in it. Got some kitchen roll there. So you'll need 4 or 5 sheets of kitchen roll to make your water absorbent section. And then what I'm using for the palette is just some white craft paper or watercolor paper. So you can follow the same methods with the kitchen roll. You just want to tear that off into their sections. And then we're going to go with a thickness of between 4 to 6 sheets. So I've got 3 sheets here that I'm going to fold in half, which will make a thickness of 6 sheets. And then you want to just cut that to shape as well, so it fits nicely into the container that you're using. So like with the sponge cloth that we used earlier, you want to make sure that it fits in nicely into your container, and then just pour some water in so all of the kitchen roll is soaked. If you've got a bit of coverage at the side, you can fold that over. That's absolutely fine. So make sure that the kitchen roll is nicely fitting into the container that you're using. Then you'll be able to, like before, just squeeze out or pour out any excess water that is within the kitchen roll. So start off by just pouring out the excess, giving the kitchen roll a bit of a push, a bit of a squeeze, and then pouring out the excess that you find from there as well. Again, holding this at an angle allows you to get the water to run to the bottom into one corner. Then for our palette level, we're going to be using this white craft paper or watercolor paper. So with this one, I'm going to fold the paper in half. It just gives it a bit more structure. And then I'm going to cut it to shape to make sure that it fits into my wet palette. Once it fits in, place it on top of the kitchen roll and then press it down so it absorbs some of the water. You'll see it coming through the sheeting and just making that bit of paper a bit damper ready for you to then apply your paint to keep your paint that bit wetter, so you can use your drops of paint for longer. So you just apply your paint into the wet palette like before. And I just wanted to show you that there is a slight difference with this than using the parchment paper. This is definitely a suitable option to use to make a cheap and affordable wet palette, but you do need to be aware that the paper acts differently to the parchment paper we were using earlier. So if I were to apply a couple of drops of water like we did on the parchment paper, what you'll see is it actually starts to run across the paper. So you do need to be more careful when applying water to the paint that you're using. But you can still use this method. It is an affordable method to use to keep your paint wet, and you can still use it to mix your paints. So I'm going to pop a bit of white and then just bring a mix of the two colours as well. So you can see that it does pull nicely when you're collecting the paint, and also you can draw it into the other colour nice and easily and make a mix in the middle. Both of the methods that I've shown you, they are both completely suitable for making your own homemade wet palettes. You don't have to pay lots of money to go and get one of these from a sort of specialist company. You can make them relatively easily, really cheaply in your own home with things that you have access to already. So let me know what you thought about this. Does it annoy you when your paint goes dry over only a few minutes? Is this an option that you'll be taking up to try and elongate the ability to have your paint accessible and ready for your minis painting? Well, thank you for watching and taking the time. I will see you in another video. Thanks for watching Bits Box World, Builds Made Easy.